You know, Dinesh D'Souza is an American patriot, and he's a good friend, and he's a good man, and he's got this film, The Dragon's Prophecy, film.com. I want you to check it out. Dinesh D'Souza, I'm looking, the Qatari government's been very, very busy, in addition to its friendship with one of the financiers who started the Tucker Carlson network, and that financier was over in Qatar, Omid Malik, bragging about the fact. I see they have been working overtime, the Qataris, to influence Republican members of Congress, so-called conservative commentators and influencers, members of various organizations, left and right, politicians, left and right. They spend a tremendous amount of money trying to buy influence, don't they?
You know, Mark, I know an attorney who does some business in the Arab world, and he says the Qataris, one of their slogans is that they are the true chosen people because God made it such that they get oil essentially coming out of the ground and the entire country doesn't have to work. And so they do work, but they work at what they call financial jihad. And that is they deploy their resources to buying influence. Now, we know that they've been doing it for some decades in America through universities. And, you know, they don't buy a conference. They buy a political science department. And I think what they've realized of late is that they need to move into the conservative movement, and they need to try to create this kind of schism within the right. And to some degree, they've been successful doing it. But there's big money behind it, and apparently a lot of people are succumbing to it. And people need to be aware that what they're getting is a bought and paid for influence campaign.
And it's massive. I mean, they've spent tens of billions of dollars basically destroying many of our institutions, our academic institutions. Everywhere you look, I mean, I was at a Johns Hopkins appointment not long ago. They built one of those buildings. I mean, the Medal of Honor Museum, brand new. They put $5 million into that. Formula racing, they're involved in that. Golf, they're involved in that. So they really are very smart and sinister about how they secrete themselves into these different Western institutions for the purpose of destroying them, right? Because they're the biggest backer of the Muslim Brotherhood and Hamas and Islamic Jihad and all the rest of them.
Yes, although they managed to play this sort of middle-of-the-road image in which they imply that they are standing in between. They're standing in the middle of the bridge between Israel and America on the one side and the rest of the Muslim world on the other. But they're very duplicitous kind of brokers. I think the other thing that's interesting is that they might have learned this from George Soros. They can deploy resources at the local level in America in school board campaigns, in sheriff's campaigns, local attorney general campaigns, where often $100,000, $200,000 makes a huge difference. And so you can buy a tremendous amount of influence in American politics if you deploy your resources kind of like a political venture capitalist of sorts.
Mm-hmm. I want to talk to you about what I call these neo-fascists and so forth. We've touched on this before. People who are promoting ideological viewpoints more in line with Qatar, more in line with Russia, more in line with the enemies of America, while claiming to be America first, while wrapping themselves in Americanism, isolationism as opposed to, smart foreign policy based on prudential decisions. And not only that, rather than provide true substantive support for their positions, they platform, nut jobs, phony historians, people who rewrite World War II and undermine our history, and they sound like Marxist leftists and so forth. What do you make of that?
Well, I think a couple of these characters, Nick Fuentes, Candace Owens, I see them as sort of solo political entrepreneurs who are navigating these treacherous waters of social media and trying to create profitable kind of niches for themselves. Tucker, I put in a different category because I think Tucker is, you know, as you and I are, he's been around for a few decades. He knows that politics is fought in teams. He knows that to drive a wedge within our own side is to strengthen the other side. And yet he's doing this, and it's clearly not accidental. It would be one thing if he had a deviant position on this or that issue, but it seems like almost every day there is a new wedge, there's a new sort of turn of the screw. And so clearly there's a systematic campaign here, I think, to undo the MAGA coalition. And it's very surprising to me that there are still some people who don't see it. Of course, they don't defend Tucker on the substance. I mean, you won't even find the Groypers come out and say, you know, Tucker's right about Sharia or Tucker's right about Maduro. He's really a conservative. They don't do that, but they use the old kind of don't cancel Tucker and let's leave him alone, Dinesh. But the interesting thing is that they too seem to recognize that Tucker's positions are indefensible.
And yet, he does it to draw a crowd, doesn't he? In addition to destroy MAGA and the Republican Party, he's waging war, he said himself, on the Republican Party. He's waging war, he said himself, on evangelical Christians. He's certainly waging war on the state of Israel. He coddles Putin. He coddles the Qatari royal family. He coddles the president of Iran and so forth and so on. I guess what I'm going to ask when we come back, Dinesh D'Souza, is how long can this go on without the vast majority of even his followers saying, all right, I got to get away from this nut job? We'll be right back. Folks, I have a question for you. Do you believe America's best days are still ahead? With the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence coming up in less than a year, my friends at the Heritage Foundation are taking stock of the current situation, and they need your input. They've launched a survey on America's future to gauge how Americans feel right now about where we are as a nation and where we're headed in the next 250 years. You know, for decades, your American values have been under attack, but now, with President Trump's administration in office, we have an opportunity to turn the tide and usher in a new golden age for America. But the Heritage Foundation needs to hear from you. What policies do patriots like you most care about? What do you believe are the defining principles of America? What legacy do you believe we should pass on to the next generation? Please visit heritage.org/Levin today and share your feedback and help shape the future of America. That's heritage.org/LEVIN. Paid for by the Heritage Foundation. We're here with our friend, Dinesh D'Souza. I want you to check out the Dragons Prophecy Film.com. You're going to love this. So my question, Dinesh D'Souza, is some of these people, are they going to flame out, maybe a slow flame out, but isn't there going to be a point at which people are going to feel misled? There'll always be that certain base that won't care, but still. The influence. I know the media are pushing them. The media want them to be the face of MAGA, the face of conservatism, and so forth. So that's a problem.
Right. I think that let's look at them individually. I think with Nick Fuentes, he conveys a certain type of dark energy that has a longer life than the normal kind of flame out. But I think pretty soon the act is going to become sort of tiresome. He traffics very much in the, I will say the thing that nobody else dares to say. You know, even when Tucker was using, these words like FAGGOT, but Tucker wouldn't use the N-word, and Nick goes, well, I'll use the N-word. So, you can do that for a while, and I guess there's a little bit of a shock value to it. But after a while, this all becomes sort of just wearying and tiresome. I think somewhat the same will happen over time to Candace for the reason that, she essentially relies on swapping out outrageous factual insinuations. But after a while, you got to step back and go, listen, has a single one of these insinuations ever produced a reliable fact that you or I could now stake, could credibly believe? And the answer is really no. There's just a a migration from one to the next. I think with Tucker is the most elusive character, because even if we were to make a list of some of his most outrageous positions, he will say, well, I didn't say those things. True, I had the strange World War II guy, and I had the nun with the mustache, and I had this weird fellow, and he said that. So with Tucker, he's got this kind of shtick, which is a parody of open-mindedness. Some of his phrases are, well, I don't really know if Hamas is a terrorist organization. So he reminds me a little bit of Obama. Remember when Obama would kind of strategically scratch his head and well, I'm contemplating the distinction between ISIS and ISIL. And Obama wasn't really doing that, but he was essentially trying to say, I'm a very deliberative, reflective sort of guy. And it took a few years before basically the whole country could see that this was a con man's routine. And I think Tucker is down that same path. But like with Obama, it's a more effective sales pitch. It'll take longer for people to figure it out.
Yeah, but you know what? Eventually they did, didn't they?
Eventually they did. And now, with Obama now, you can almost see that whenever he opens his mouth, people's eyes start to roll immediately. And I think that's going to happen in this case as well.
Mm-hmm. But in the meantime, in the short to midterm, Dinesh D'Souza, they can do grave damage to the prospects in the midterm election and even 2028, can't they? Because in a fairly evenly divided electorate here and there, if you just even have a small fraction or a small percentage of the population, conservatives, Republicans, who choose not to vote, who are turned off or so forth, you can lose.
Exactly. And not only that, but I think that there was a quite serious play, particularly on Tucker's part, to bring some of the largest institutions on the right. We can, name the Heritage Foundation and Turning Point USA as obvious examples, to sort of get institutional buy-in to what you could call, Tuckerism or the Tuckerite turn
By the way,
MAGA.
it's really Pat Buchananism, isn't it? I mean, that's pretty much what it is. It's this paleo-conservative idea. But go ahead.
Well, it is, but I think that I think with Buchanan, I knew Buchanan, and you probably did. I didn't know him so well in his later phase when he became very deeply gloomy about the West. But see, when I saw Buchanan, even some of the stuff he was saying about World War II, I thought to myself, look, Buchanan's in this Spenglerian, gloomy idea that the West is finished. Mm-hmm. And, he's looking back and he's saying, that it was the two world wars that did it. And so I saw Buchananite revisionism as motivated by trying to serve this larger thesis of apocalyptic pessimism. With Tucker, it's a lot more sniper fire because it's all over the place. One day it's World War II, and the next day it's Ukraine, and the next day it is Sharia, and then he's on to Venezuela. And so with Tucker, it's a lot. It doesn't have the sense of being thought through at all. It's almost like he's deliberately twisting the knife.
I honestly think Buchanan was and is a lot smarter than Tucker. I don't think he's all that smart. I think he's clever. I think he's got the gift of sort of twisting sentences and thought processes and so forth and so on. But when you really think of something substantive, historical, scholarly, intellectual, Tucker's doesn't really come to mind, does he, Dinesh?
Well, think about it. Buchanan was a writer, and he produced columns week to week. He wrote several books. He's at least an amateur student of history. What happens with Tucker is you don't get any of this. Tucker doesn't really write. He doesn't have any sort of he makes these sort of declaratory judgments like it's been known from the beginning of Christianity that Christian Zionism is a heresy. It's like, reference, please. Citation, please. What is the name of this heresy? Who are the promulgators of this heresy in, let's say, the 3rd or 4th century AD? Can you name them? None of this is not only demonstrated, it's not even attempted. So it relies on the audience to just sheepishly nod and go, well, Tucker says it, so it must be true.
Mm-hmm. Why do you think that is, by the way?
Well, I think that what we have here is, you could almost call it a personality swap, a certain type of political trans phenomenon. I think what happened is Tucker built a lot of credibility when he was at Fox, when his monologues were like, the thing you had to listen to in the evening. Tucker built a reputation because of his scathing critiques of COVID ideology and issues like that. And then he metamorphosed into a different person. And so I know people who they're kind of appalled by the new Tucker, but they keep scratching their head about how sort of early Tucker became this Tucker, and they're kind of frozen in this attempt to try to understand why this happened. I'm less interested in why it happened and in the nefarious results of it.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. All right, very good. Well, you're doing a fantastic job. You spend a lot of time on the internet. There's a lot of ugly people on the internet, aren't there? You take a lot of incoming, don't you?
Well, these days, what's remarkable is, had you asked me, for most of my career, whether or not I have, and so sometimes people would ask me when I'd speak on campuses, have you experienced a lot of racism? And someone could ask the same question of you, anti-Semitism on the right. And I would say, no, I've actually traveled in the very, right-wing precincts of America. I've experienced very little of it. But somehow in the last, 6 months to 9 months, I can't give that answer to the question, because there is so much vile sort of retaliation when you post anything, even relatively benign, but anything that's perceived as being sort of sympathetic to Israel, or sympathetic to brown people, or sympathetic to immigration. You get this kind of vicious name calling, and I've never really seen anything quite like it, and it does suggest a dark turn in our politics.
No, I see it too. The anti-Semitism online is unbelievable, and it's grown into anti-Christianity that's unbelievable. It's grown into anti-Indian, people with the Indian heritage. I've seen that. That's unbelievable, going after you, going after Vivek, going after others. It's really incredible. And some of it's foreign, we know that, but too much of it is domestic. I think a lot of it could be these, they call them groypers, I call them gropers, but these Fuentes people, and a lot of them obviously are Owens and Tucker followers. I think they really play into the Klan mentality, to the neo-Nazi mentality. I'm just telling you, I think they really do, and I think all they care about is getting the eyes, grifting, and destroying what exists. Isn't there, let me ask you this, there seems to be an overlap with the Marxist left in this regard. They believe the world began today, that everything before was wrong, except if they get a phony historian in to sort of to turn it into nonsense. But their mentality is, if you're 25 years old and you agree with them, you should blow off all history, blow off all that's come before, whether it's Reagan, whether it's Buckley, whether it's Friedman, whether it's Hayek, whether it's Adams, but whatever it is, Aristotle, Cicero, none of that matters. What matters is what we think today, much like the Marxists, no?
Well, it's true that that for some of these guys, their historical claims are based on like a single example. So they think, for example, that regime change never works because it didn't work in Iraq. I wouldn't even say it didn't work in Afghanistan. The record there's more mixed. Sure, the Taliban's back in power. But you and I could name 25 examples of regime change, let's say, in the last century that have worked out beautifully. I'm quite sure that if there was regime change now in places like Venezuela or Iran, the result, even if we don't know what it is going to be better than what's there now. And so you do have this sort of shoddy attempt to make general principles out of very limited historical materials, often going back no more than a decade.
Mm-hmm. Check out Dinesh's new film. It's great. The Dragon's Prophecy. TheDragonsProphecyFilm.com, to be more precise. TheDragonsProphecyFilm.com. You're going to love it, folks. I'm telling you, you will. And Dinesh, thanks, buddy. God bless you and your beautiful wife.
Hey, I appreciate it. Thank you, Mark.
All right. Take care of yourself.